Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us a long-awaited special returning guest, Douglas Murray, whose new book, War in the West, is out now. I'm very excited to have you join us again. This is a topic that has been brewing for a couple of decades. Can you tell us, for people unfamiliar with your work, what is the thesis of this new book?
First of all, great to be with you again. I so enjoyed our last podcast, and I'm looking forward to this very much. Yes, the War on the West is about the war on absolutely everything to do with the Western tradition that's going on, has been going on, as you say, brewing away for a couple of decades and more. Its features, I say, are first of all the war on the peoples of the West, including the war on white people, where the only group in societies like America where you're allowed to speak viciously, unpleasantly, reprehensibly, with a generalizing tendency, all that sort of thing, is against white people. If you wanted to, for some reason, carry out an ideological attack on the underpinnings of a country in Africa, you would probably end up having to carry out a war against the history and the peoples of that place, and it would be a war on the group there. Same thing with China, same thing with any other group. The West is still majority white, and for some reason it has become in our day permissible to speak about that white majority in ways which are just absolutely vile. It's the only legitimate racism in our time. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is just the war on our history, where everything in Western history is torn down. The founding fathers are all racist. Abraham Lincoln's a racist. Everybody in our past is a racist. Everybody is smeared with colonialism or slavery, as if our countries in the West were the only peoples who ever did anything bad in history, and everyone else was, sort of living in Eden until the wicked Westerner came along. And
wait, can I interject? There's no calls to tear down the pyramids in Egypt.
No,
right?
And, I mean, who do you think put those up? Do you think they were paid a fair day's wage for a fair day's work? No, it was built by slaves. So it's very strange. It's like only one group has this being done to them and does it to themselves. The Chinese don't want to think badly of their history. Africans don't particularly want to think badly of their history. They might otherwise dwell on the fact that they sold their brothers and sisters into slavery, which, as Voltaire said, was possibly the only crime even worse than what the Europeans did to Africans. So most people want to think well of themselves. It's only the West that does this to itself. Then there's the war on Western religion, the war on Western traditions of, first of all, religion, including obviously the Judeo-Christian tradition, but also the secular tradition, where all of the secular thinkers of the past who we rely on, the people who brought us the ideas of reason and rationalism, are all also brought down because they're besmirched with racism, colonialism, the same tedious but very, very deadly set of sins. And then the war on Western culture, where just everything now in the culture, as you know, from any film, any streaming services product, any novel, any play, any art collection, any theater or music is all played through this race lens. Baroque ensembles have to find Black Baroque composers or be deemed, dealing only in the work of that terrible thing, dead white men. As I always say, Michael, people who combine three terrible traits, one being white, one being male, and the third unforgivable one of having died. Because who would do that? What kind of a loser? These are some of the foundations of what I think is going on. But as you say, it's really interesting is it's been brewing underneath us for quite a while now.
So that perfectly sets up my next question, because I'm very curious to see where you think the roots of this are. And if you had to ask me, I would point my fingers across the pond to you and the Fabians. And you had this kind of leftism, like psychologically, loves the outgroup, loves the outsider. oh, these
Yes.
are Belgian chocolates or these are South American grapes, just inherently because they're from another place, they must be better, right? It's just this kind of love of, oh, you haven't heard the Swedish 7-inch band record I just got. It's
Yeah.
terrific. But you had this kind of valorization and glorification of the Soviet Union in the early 20th century. You had people like H.G. Wells who sat down and interviewed Stalin and was
Yes.
like, oh, you know, I think I'm to the left of you. And this kind of idea that they wouldn't like it so much if it was happening in Russia, but what was going on in Spain with the Spanish Civil War, what was going on with Lenin and Stalin,
Exactly.
they couldn't get over it. They were ecstatic.
Yeah, this is what I describe as the tendency to love anything as long as it's not your own.
Yeah.
You know, people who you know, we know, you know, generation of students who save up money to travel the world to go to the temples of the Far East and have never seen a cathedral in their own backyard. Right. You know, I mean, this is a definite tendency. It's a form of self-hatred, a form of self-abnegation. That is a sort of self-stripping away of your own culture and tradition, and a sort of idea that there's something backwards about being proud of it. You know, in the 1940s, as you know, George Orwell famously said that your average English intellectual would rather die than to sort of stand during the national anthem.
Oh yeah.
The truth is that instinct seems to have spread absolutely everywhere. Where and if you don't have the instinct, you're browbeaten into getting it. You know, in the chapter on history, you know, I describe just the remorseless way in which all of our heroes in the West have been torn down in recent years. You know, cinema audiences, when Darkest Hour came up, in the UK at least, again and again kept getting to their feet and applauding at the end. Just a totally unanimous and uncalled, you know, just a nascent wellspring of feeling that clicked in, of pride and just, you know, and now all those people like me, we're all told, no, you shouldn't revere him. You shouldn't revere him as being, among other persons, the person who stood against Nazism or the person who, you know, your grandparents fought, you know, the calling of. You should dislike this person because of these 10 historical crimes that he's accused of now. And every time Churchill's mentioned now in the popular media, the BBC runs a piece on its website, the 10 main crimes of Winston Churchill, you know, and they've done this to person after person. They've done it to Abraham Lincoln, to Thomas Jefferson, to obviously Christopher Columbus, just absolutely everyone, other than anyone who isn't Western, you know. So you get to this stage where, you know, politicians in Western democracies say that Chairman Mao deserves some veneration still because he was impressive in what he managed to achieve in terms of leaps forward in agriculture in China, and you ignore 60 million people killed by the man in question. Meantime, some radical leftists still claim that Winston Churchill was responsible for the death of one miner when the police were sent in 1910 to a town in Wales. Actually, it wasn't Churchill's fault. And for that reason, the same far leftists who excuse 60 million dead for Chairman Mao claim that because there's one dead miner in Wales, Winston Churchill has nothing good to be said for him. You know, it's a totally remorseless attack on everything in our past.
Well, I'm very disturbed to hear that, because there's an author named James Burnham. He was friends with Trotsky. Then he became a conservative. He was an early member of National Review, and he had a book called Suicide the West. And he was a very idiosyncratic character. And one of the books that he had written at the time in the 40s, he basically took it as a given that Hitler was going to win, or there was going to be some kind of forced compromise and everyone's going to get their sphere of influence. And Churchill, you know, Thatcher brought this up constantly. Britain stood alone against Hitler for a while. It was him. So to be the prime minister when you're facing a blitzkrieging Hitler conquering all of Europe, if you can't admire him regardless of your politics, I think there's something fundamentally disturbed around your thinking.
Completely disturbed. As you know, I write in the book in a section on this about a panel that took place at Churchill College, Cambridge last year. The college at Cambridge University named after Winston Churchill. And there was a panel called The Crimes of Winston Churchill. And 3 or 4 utterly unqualified pseudo professors who were all just race hucksters of different kinds, all just lay out their attacks on Churchill. And between them, they came to the conclusion that the war would have been won without Winston Churchill. In any case, Winston Churchill wasn't very important. That, quote, all we did by winning the war was to switch from one version of white supremacy to another version of white supremacy. And in any case, what happened wasn't particularly remarkable because white people were genociding each other and everyone else always. So it didn't really matter.
Hey guys, Cerebral is an online mental health service that offers prescription medication, counseling, and therapy for anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, and more. Cerebral is one of the few services that provides prescription medication online through a licensed provider, and it ships straight to your door. You can skip the pharmacy lines. And with the Cerebral mobile app, it's like having your personal care team wherever you are. You can message your care team and access self-care resources wherever you go. Connect with your counselor and therapist on your own schedule through your laptop or the Cerebral mobile app. Schedule sessions. You don't have to wait 2 weeks to be seen. 80% of members see a provider within days. You can do your sessions on a laptop or on your phone, so you can always find an area at home where you're most comfortable. And affordable treatments are 1/3 the price of traditional therapy. They're available with or without insurance. Cerebral is in network for several insurance outlets, and they're working every day to grow their partnerships. With in network, your monthly cost is even lower. And check this out, 50% of Cerebral's clinicians self-identify as people of color. It's important to Cerebral to have the diversity so everyone can get the treatment they deserve. And for listeners of this program, you can get 65% off your first month of medication management and care counseling at cerebral.com/YW. Go to cerebral.com/YW for 65% off your first month. That's total just $30 to get started. You can join Cerebral today on their mission to make quality mental health care accessible and affordable for all. Your Welcome is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Now, most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yeah, while you're listening to me talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you could be doing right now, getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy. You can save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles in your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. Let's get back to the show. I don't think that they believe what they say as they say it. I look at it from a Jonathan Haidt perspective, that they start with their conclusion and reason backward, because it's very hard. Anyone, no matter how depraved, you sit them down and say, listen, are you going to say if the choice is between some kind of, Reagan-esque nightmare dystopia in your mind and literal Hitler, like you're saying it's a flip of a coin? I don't think they would say it in other contexts, but on the stage, when they're trying to force a conclusion, they have to engage in these kind of mental gymnastics.
Well, here's the other thing. I think that it's not just they've come to their conclusion, it's that they've come to what they want the conclusion to be able to cause.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right.
What I mean is they want to demoralize people in the West. I got to this as I was writing. I realized, of course, they're doing target selection.
Yeah.
If you want to destroy the British public's sense of pride, you can't do it so long as Churchill stands.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So get Churchill. So long as Abraham Lincoln is revered, you can't destroy the American people's pride. So you got to get Abraham Lincoln, because if you take out Lincoln and you take out all the founding fathers, you've basically taken out the ability of an American to feel pride in the past. And that's what they're doing.
And this also goes back thousands of years in the sense of desanctifying sacred spaces from your opponents. If I go into your church and set on fire, that's one thing, right? But if I go to your church and I pee on your holy book and I take down your gods and I desecrate them in front of you, that is so much more emotional. And it's so much more a demonstration of my strength. And my ferocity. And of course, that's going to make people, do a second take, because now they're scared. If you can take down my God and my faith, or what I hold sacred, not a literal God, obviously, then no one can protect me.
Exactly. If they can pull down all of the statues, if they can deface everyone, first of all, then nothing's safe.
Right.
And second, they can make us believe anything next. That's I have this section in the book about, okay, so we've done this remorseless, everybody who lived in the past happened not to have our views in 2022 about race and so on. Amazing. Who'd have thought? The Washington Post attacked Aristotle the other year, calling him the grandfather of scientific racism. And they complained because Aristotle, writing 2.5 millennia ago, didn't have the 2020s view on a range of things, including slavery. I mean, who could have thunk it? So that's one thing, is they've done this to all these people. But here you go. Who don't they do it to? That's why I have a very fun section in the book about Karl Marx. Oh, yeah. Because one of the things I decided to do was, let's apply this evenly then. So if you go through Karl Marx's correspondence, he's an incredibly racist man. He consistently uses the N-word, usually hyphenates it to Jew, because he's also very, very anti-Semitic. In fact, when I was doing the audiobook for the War on the West, I got to this bit where I said to the people in the production thing, I said, look, I mean, this bit is so racist, I can't read it out loud, but it's Karl Marx. Right. And I thought, on the one hand, it would have been great, because if anyone had come for me in a sort of Rogan-esque fashion and said, you once used the N-word, I could say, well, I was just quoting Karl Marx.
Right.
But the point is that he was profoundly racist in his public and private statements. He was terrible on slavery, terrible on colonialism. And since this has come out, and since the serials of my book have been published and people have started to read it, Marxists have been saying, well, he was a man of his time. Oh, I see. Unlike everyone else.
But that's not true. I got to interrupt you. That's not true. It is not at the time a place that kind of virulence was. It may have been acceptable, but it wasn't the median.
It was uncommon for the time, definitely. I mean, Marx was far, far more racist than I know Thomas Jefferson or David Hume. David Hume, one of the great figures of the Scottish Enlightenment, currently is sitting on the naughty step. Historically, having had all of his reputation defamed in recent years because of one footnote in one essay, which is racist. And every Hume scholar knows about it. And it's a bit strange because it seems to go counter to so much of the rest of his writings. But, we don't go to Hume for his views on race in that one footnote. We go to him for the enormous work he did to sort of try to take magical thinking out of society and get us towards a more rationalist frame of mind. But, as I say, Karl Marx, they don't do this with. And the other thing, by the way, I've had in recent days from various Marxists is, well, we don't go to Karl Marx for his views on these things. We go to him for his economics theory. You go, well, we don't go to Thomas Jefferson for advice on what to do with slaves. Right. I mean, it's so completely obvious when they don't do it to certain people what they're actually doing.
This is one of the reasons I am so hopeful about the future of this country. I was born in the Soviet Union. I left there when I was 2. My mom obviously grew up there, and I've asked her about this. I'm like, what was it like in school? She goes, it wasn't hard, because one year this person was the great hero of the revolution, and the next year we find out this guy's been an asshole the whole time, and then the next year he's reversed. So there really is not this kind of sense of consistency. It's almost like professional wrestling, where this guy's the bad guy and you have to hate him. And then sometimes they reverse. I remember, this is not having to do with, specifically piece of your book, James Comey was the great villain because he reopened the investigation to Hillary Clinton right before the election, and he was to blame. And then Trump fired him, and Stephen Colbert's audience started applauding. And Colbert goes, no, this is, and he had to actually inform them, we like him now. And it's this bizarre, I think a lot of this, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. A lot of Marxism has this kind of ex post facto approach to truth. Like, if something is useful in furthering revolution, it's true. If something is not, it's inherently false. And that seems to be the basis of this approach. Do you think that has roots in this kind of neo-Marxist thought?
I do. By the way, you remind me of one of my favorite jokes, which is, rather than just looking for a quick quote in the book about Colbert, but there was a great joke in the Soviet Union when, because they kept changing the textbooks, as your mother said. You probably know this joke, but it's my favorite joke, actually, that because they kept changing the story in the history textbooks, that when the Soviet Union fell, there was a year out where they didn't teach history because they had to get it right. and the joke emerged in the Soviet Union that the only thing that is certain is the future. The past keeps on changing.
Yeah.
It's completely true. I wanted to say, it wasn't Colbert. It was that other late night non-comedian. What's his name?
Jimmy Kimmel.
Jimmy Kimmel, and who's the other incredibly unfunny one that no one's ever laughed at?
Seth Meyers.
Anyhow, one of them does.
James
one of them
something. There's a third one.
One of
James.
them says one of them, because of course I don't watch just like no one else does. But the one of them says in last year to his studio audience that the results of the new census just come out in America, and for the first time show a decline in the white population, and the audience whoops and cheers. And he has a moment even of like, that was a strange response. I didn't think it was strange at all. I thought it was very revealing, but I thought it was eminently typical of the age we're in, where if a late night comedian had announced that the new census in the US showed a decline in the black population, people would understandably, you'd be quite shocked if people started cheering in the audience. But this is the one group you can do that with, and even a late night comedian sort of doesn't think it's wrong.
I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on someone else who's an opponent of much of this, but I think coming from the other angle, which is Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. Now, he has also, in a sense, declared war on the West, but what he regards as the West to be is leftist kind of multi-ethnic liberal values, and he has much more of an authoritarian bent than I think you would probably be comfortable with. What do you think of his approach in this kind of Le Pen in France sort of populist reaction?
I'm not a fan of Le Pen. I do admire some of what Viktor Orban has done. I met him a number of times on visits to Hungary. He was one when my book 2 books ago, The Strange Death of Europe, came out. A load of people suddenly said I was Viktor Orban's favorite public intellectual because he'd taken a photo of himself ahead of his prime ministerial re-election campaign. He took a photo of himself reading The Strange Death of Europe and said, if you want to make good choices, you need to know what's happening. So I was sort of unwittingly thrown into a Hungarian election, which I hadn't been expecting ever particularly. But I mean, and I still, so as a result of this, quite often people sort of try to, I don't know, claim that I inspire Viktor Orban in some way or so forth. In fact, I mean, that book was, if I don't want to sound over defensive about this, but I mean, as far as I know, like the Slovakian prime minister read it, and he was a left winger and was very praising about it. And, the German government, the French government, the Australian prime minister praised it. It wasn't only praised by Viktor Orban. So I always add that in just because there's this trap the left always tries to set for me with
you're liked by the wrong
Viktor
person.
Orban. Yeah, exactly. You know that, Trey. But no, I mean, I admire what he did in the migration crisis of 2015 because he was the one European leader who said, no, what Chancellor Merkel you're trying to do is mad. I'm not going along with it. I don't fundamentally transform my society. And I thought he was completely right. I thought he took a lot of flack then, but he was right. I took a lot of flack for saying that I thought he was right, but I still think he's right. I mean, Hungarian politics is strange, isn't it? There are these moments when certain countries become sort of inflection points.
Yeah.
And Hungary has strangely, I mean, for a country of 10 million people, has become one such place. I mean, I don't have very many views on it. He's been re-elected repeatedly on very large mandates. And what I am still amazed by is that the rest of the European countries, and indeed America, never ever grapples with what might be being said by the Hungarian people. They always do the same thing. They pretend that he isn't legitimately elected.
Right.
They did it this time when his re-election just last month. Which is his 3rd or 4th in a row, I can't remember. Every single other party united against him. By the way, that included the party that until recently everyone agreed was far right, actually far right, Jobbik.
Neo-Nazi.
They actually have they've tried to clean themselves up a bit and be a bit more respectable, but they were, actually sort of goose stepping, they were actually, far right, as opposed to everyone else who's just mildly right of center.
Yeah.
But Jobbik and all the left-wing parties all united in a Stop Orban coalition, and he still won. And there were still people in the Western media sort of implying that this was some kind of fix and so on, or it was because the media is so much on Orban's side. And of course, there is pro-Orban media, there is anti-Orban media, which a lot of people don't realize from outside. He definitely does have a dominance within the press, there's no doubt about that. But, what happened in the election in America in 2020 was the press in America and the tech companies fair in their own reporting of it. I'd have said not. And in any case, this isn't the whole thing. So my main gripe about Orban and co is that nobody ever wants to try to form any lessons from it because they pretend he's not legitimately elected, and they never take, it's this constant opportunity cost of refusing to accept reality. I think it's really interesting that Hungarian people keep voting for him, and there must be reasons why. And I think I know some of them. But most of the liberal media and elsewhere, in America in particular, is totally uninterested in that. They just want to sort of say fascist, authoritarian. But yes, he has a particular vision. He sort of basically wants to keep Hungary hungry, and I think he has that right. And the people have the right to approve of that. And if they didn't want it, they could vote for a different leader.
Folks, free email services like Gmail and Yahoo aren't really free. You pay with your privacy. Your business plan, Google has it. Your medical records, Yahoo can sell them to drug companies. You all know how I feel about the collusion between tech companies and corporations and the government. They're all working hand in hand and at the expense of the common person. The more you use Gmail and Facebook and Yahoo, the more you're dependent on them being good actors with your information. And at the end of the day, these are not good people. We should all be concerned about email surveillance and the risks that come with it. That's why so many people have been using StartMail. It makes you feel safe again. StartMail keeps your email private, period. Every email can be encrypted, even if the recipient doesn't use encryption. And when you delete an email in StartMail, unlike these other sites, it's gone forever. And they use their own servers, not Amazon's, which means they can't be put out of business like Parler. Switching to StartMail is seamless. You can easily transfer all your current email data, so there's no starting from scratch. StartMail is backed by the most stringent privacy laws in the world. Your cybersecurity has never been more at risk. Email snoops and scammers are taking advantage of the pandemic, with phishing having skyrocketed in the last year. You can take control of your privacy with StartMail before it's too late. Start by securing your email privacy with StartMail. Sign up today. You get 50% off your first year. Go to startmail.com/you're welcome. That's START mail with a T, STARTmail.com/you're welcome for 50% off your first year. Startmail.com/you're welcome. Guys, I'm obsessed with plants. I have 200 species in my house. And when it comes to caring for your plants, know-how matters. That's why fastgrowingtrees.com's experts curate thousands of plant varieties that will thrive in your climate, location, and needs. You don't got to wait in line. No messy cars from hauling plants all over town. You order online over the phone, and your plants are shipped to your door in 1 to 2 days. Plus, their growing and care advice is available 24/7. Whether you're looking for increased privacy, shade, or adding some natural beauty to your yard, Fast Growing Trees have the perfect plants and the expertise to help you find them. Even if you've never had a green thumb, they'll make you feel like you do. 1 million home gardeners have already seen what fastgrowingtrees.com can do for them. This is a great idea. Plus, with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, you can trust everything will be healthy for years to come. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/welcome right now. You get 15% off your entire order. 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/welcome. Fastgrowingtrees.com/welcome. Let's get back to the show. Well, in my understanding, I'm very curious to your thoughts on this. They don't view democracy as an inherent good, no matter how much they whinge about our democracy, They view it as a means to an end of their maintaining, controlling power. And if something works as opposed to them, by definition, in their definition, it's thereby not democratic.
Yes, there's something like that going on. Absolutely. And I just think, as I say, I really resent the ability of some people to just lie about situations in certain countries, rather than, you might, as I say, I'm not a fan of Le Pen, but if she was the far right extremist figure solely that the media says she is, and I'm very, as I say, I don't like the dynastic stuff of
Yes.
the Le Pen family. I mean, I think it's the whole stuff of having to have a family member is deeply sinister, and seems to be some kind of clarion call to whatever it is that her odious father can sort of whip up. But you know, even if she was the worst version of what the worst people say, why did 40% of the French public vote for her? What does that tell us?
Right.
I mean, I would have thought it told us something quite interesting about the direction of France, as it does that 20% of the public in the first round voted for sort of proto-communist in Mélenchon. But like, I'm not a communist, or a socialist, but anymore. I'm not a far right winger. But I'm very interested in why people vote for people who are described in this way, and what the issues they might be trying to get to are. You know, like what's gone wrong. Might there be anything wrong with Emmanuel Macron's sort of type of centrism? Could be.
You work in newspapers, you have for a long time. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. One of the things that drives me crazy, and I've talked to Glenn Greenwald about this, and I'm sure you're going to agree, is that so much of our news of the last 5 years have been resulted as a function of Trump. And basically Bolsonaro in Brazil is Trump, and Duterte in the Philippines is Trump, and Marine Le Pen's the Trump of France, and Orban's the Trump of Hungary.
And even Boris Johnson is the Trump of Britain in some people's eyes. I mean, it's amazing.
Maybe it's the hair in that regard.
Yeah, no, well, Biden pretty much said as much. Do you remember? Biden actually said before coming into office, he's basically exactly the same identikit as Trump. He knew nothing about Boris Johnson.
Right,
he just looked at the hair. It's like, I mean, we're not dealing with very deep analysis with some of these people.
That was what I wanted to ask you. Do you think that these journalists are just dim, or do you think they're just dumbing it down for kind of an audience that's been trained to think in binary?
No, incredibly dim.
Oh, wow.
Incredibly dim and incredibly uninterested in the story. Incredibly uninterested in the story. I mean, I've been to Hungary a number of times to try to work out what the story actually is there, and I think it's pretty complex. And so even on that one story, which I don't have enough time to do more on, but I mean, I know that what I read in The Economist, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so on is just grossly simplistic, and they haven't bothered to look into it. And I know that, for instance, I mean, I started a little trend in the UK of, or they took part in a little trend in the UK of joking about what the New York Times says about the UK after Brexit. And it actually has run story after story that is just provably false. And I mean, it's hilarious. Like one of them reported that like the British people sort of eat stewed mutton all the time. It was like the thing was like a Dickensian vision of the UK. I mean, I think the person hadn't even got on a plane and gone to Britain. You know, they sort of find one taxi driver and then you know, report a source, and I mean, the New York Times alone is given a totally false impression of Britain in the last 6 years, because it's still punishment beating Britain for voting Brexit, which of course wasn't what the New York Times wanted. No, I mean, there's an amazing lack of curiosity in the media, and I can only think it's because, and there are some very notable exceptions. There are some notable exceptions in terms of papers and specifically among certain reporters. Most of the media is not very high quality people anymore, I'm afraid to say. They just aren't. The talent doesn't go into it. I say this myself as being in the industry. There are remarkable people in the industry, yes. But seriously, if you're talented and really smart and want to, you know, the media, like, what I mean, what would you go into it for?
But doesn't that bode well for the future, in the sense that if the enemy class, as I always say, is composed of so many unimpressive people, to regard their victory as a given is therefore absurd?
Well, a lot of absurd people end up being victorious. I mean, I'm sorry, it's one of the horrible facts of life I've just broken to you there. Look at that, breaking your illusion. No, I mean, I just have no faith that because they're ridiculous and have an unsustainable narrative, that it will actually not sustain itself, at least for a very long time. I mean, I don't know how long. We've all had experiences. You've had experiences. It used to be the case that the media exposed itself person by person in things like, I don't know, if you knew somebody upon whom a horrible tabloid hatchet job had been done, Like, you were the sort of person who after that didn't trust the media.
Right.
Like, you had to be really, do you remember, like in the 1980s, it had to be really precise, basically. Like, if a friend of yours was done over, or a family member, and you were doorstopped by the press and all that sort of thing, you sort of, your view of the press changed. Here's the thing, almost everybody in the world has now been in that position. Almost everybody in our societies has been in the position of seeing through a part of the media and seeing it in an entirely reprehensible light. You know, I have personal ones that have made me, you know, become particularly cynical. I think one of mine was when Notre Dame in Paris burnt down, almost collapsed, and the spire fell down. I was, along with Ben Shapiro and a couple of other people, somebody who wrote a piece lamenting this appalling thing. And the Washington Post said that the burning of Notre Dame had become an alt-right thing, and that I was among the alt-right figures who had lamented the burning of Notre Dame. You know, like, lamenting the burning of one of the great cathedrals of the West had suddenly become an alt-right meme in the eyes of the Washington Post. Well, you might say there's only one columnist. Well, they allowed it to be published. You know, so it sort of happened to it's happened to some of us actually personally, but it's happened to whole societies. We've all seen the things they've just made up, and we see that there's no punishment. You know, my big bugbear, among other things, you know, I write a weekly column for the New York Post, and you know, one of my bugbears is not just what happened to the Post with Twitter and others censoring America's oldest newspaper before the election, but the dozens of former intelligence chiefs and serving intelligence chiefs who came out and said that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. What's happened to those people? Nothing, as far as I can see. They should all be cashiered. They should all lose their pensions. They should all be farmed out. Nothing happens.
I feel like we're singing a duet because this is my song, Personal Consequences. Another example is we were told very explicitly that unless there were boots in the ground in Syria, this is going to be another genocide. They were invoking the Holocaust. They were going to be exterminating entire people. None of those people who are on television and the press demanding it happen immediately. And then they just stopped talking about it when that didn't end up happening.
Yeah.
So this is something that I agree with you is has to change. But I think the growing sense of vindictiveness among people who have been burned is going in a positive direction, because it's one thing to have a disagreement of opinion, or you want more spending on healthcare, you want more spending on education, that's fine. But when you're personally lying and demonstrating, the idea that Hunter Biden is taking photos of his genitals with a ruler, and this is somehow the Photoshop by the Russians, is so absurd as to beggar belief.
Well, even more absurd. I mean, I didn't mind about the dick pics seemed to me to be extraneous to the main story, which was the unbelievable corruption, as Miranda Devine shows in her book, going on in the first family. I mean, I still can't understand why the story of the email, which Miranda quotes in her book, the email where Hunter says to his daughter, you know, whatever. First of all, he says, you have no idea what degradations I had to go through to support this family. You think, oh, I'd like you to tell more about that.
Yeah.
And then he says, and what's more, whatever you earn in your life, at least I won't do to you what my father did to me, and take half of everything I earn. Think, okay, that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
That might be worth chasing up. If you've got all the resources of the Washington Post or something, you know, maybe you chase up that story. Maybe you don't try to silence another newspaper. Maybe you chase up the story. Oh, I forgot, of course, Washington Post is too busy sending its crack team of reporters to go and dox libs of TikTok. They've got real work to do.
You ever feel like you're being followed around the internet? Maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you. So our sponsor, IPVanish VPN, is here to help you take back your privacy and help you become anonymous on the internet. What is IPVanish? It's a virtual private network, a VPN for short. It's an important tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use a VPN on your computer, tablet, phone, anywhere you stream media. When you use a VPN, all your data is encrypted, what you're reading, what you're searching, what you're watching, whatever it is you're doing. That's important because whatever it is you're doing isn't anyone's business but yours. For listeners to the show, IPVanish is offering 65% off the annual plan. It's only $375 a month. IPVanish is super easy to use. Turn on with one click. It runs in the background to help protect you while you're browsing the web. If you run into a problem, no worries. IPVanish has 24/7 support by email, chat, and phone. All you have to do is go to ipvanish.com/malice. Use promo code malice. That's MALICE to get 65% off. Their annual plan is only $44.99. for the first year with our discount. This is the time to sign up, because with our discount and their current promotion, you get a VPN for 65% off the usual offering. IPVanish is the best of best. They've got a 4.7 out of 5 on Trustpilot with more than 6,000 reviews. So remember, it's ipvanish.com/malice to get the deal and start protecting your online anonymity right now. Let's talk about that since you brought it up. I in my opinion, this is one of the first Taylor Renz with the Libs of TikTok story. For those who don't know, she published the woman's information. She showed up at her relative's house. I don't understand why. If the person, you could just say, this looks to be their address or whatever. It was not relevant unless to invade somebody's space, in my view. But the backlash against her on social media, personally, that reporter, was pervasive and widespread. And this seems to be the first time in recent memory, or in my lifetime maybe, where the reporter themselves became the story as opposed to the outlet. And I think that's a positive step.
I agree. Actually, it is a positive step, but these are baby steps, aren't they?
Sure.
I mean, like the Washington Post also stood by her.
Oh yeah.
And of course, she was able to do the Kathy Newman trick, the great 1-2 trick of turning from bully to crybaby. I tried to dox this person by turning up at their relative's address and publishing private information, and now everyone's coming for me and boo-hoo, and I'm prejudiced against, and I'm the victim. I mean, this is a woman who was crying in public only days before about what can happen when online mobs come for you. So I agree it's positive, but like what's her name, Sarah Young at the New York Times, when it turned out she hated white people. I'd rather that there was actually seen to be some cost. I'd rather there was actually seen to be some cost, and I'd rather that the papers didn't do what they've done in both those cases, which is to stand by their woman, as a result, massively further and accentuate the depletion of their own brand.
But isn't there some cost in this sense? If there was another piece written by her, even if it was all true, everyone would be able to dismiss it offhand because this is just another Taylor Renz hit piece?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so. I mean, her name should be a sort of synonym for journalistic lack of integrity. I hope it is. I hope she sort of joins Stephen Glass and co.
I mean, my thoughts just go back to, this has been going on since the early 30s, at least, with Walter Duranty. When you had those two reporters were revealing what was going on with Stalin's, assault in Ukraine and the death by starvation of literally millions of Ukrainians. And all the Western journalists colluded to not only say this wasn't happening, but to attack, Malcolm Muggeridge and what was his name? Owen Jones. I forget his first name.
Not Owen Jones. No. He's a terrible leftist.
What's something Jones?
You mean yes?
Clive Jones?
No. What's his name? Made in that wonderful movie a couple of years ago. Really surprising. Oh, we should know his name. But yes, made into a really good movie, which for once actually celebrated somebody who should be celebrated. Yeah.
Right, but this was a thing, this kind of collusion within the industry to silence voices that dissent. This has been going on for quite some time.
That's right, but as I say, I mean, it's not inevitable the good guys out. They did on that occasion, but it took years, didn't it? I mean, it took years.
My point is, nowadays that we have social media, back then, I can't communicate with you. Right now, we're on Zoom. We could communicate in real time. Back then, it was very easy for Stalin or Hitler to obscure much of what they'd done because cameras were not ubiquitous, phones are not ubiquitous. You can control information. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to control information. We see this constantly when reporters are trying to position something one way in front of a camera, then someone just walks by with their phone and shows the whole thing, and they have.
Didn't you love that the other day? I loved it when Don Lemon was Don Lemon, I'm never quite sure.
No, Tucker calls him Don Lemon on purpose to mess with him, so it's Lemon.
I know, but Don Lemon sounds so much worse. It does. Hello, Mr. Lemon. Also, in the UK, to be a lemon is like to be a total dunce. If you call it, you total lemon. Anyhow, Don Lemon. Do you notice the other week when he was in, he was trying to avoid that problem he had at CNN, and immediately flew off to the least dangerous bit of Ukraine, to Lvov, and stood about 100 miles away from a fire that had broken out. And there was this great footage where CNN's war correspondent, Don Lemon, was standing there in full flak jacket, complete, sort of all of that. And these civilians were just walking by, like they're shopping and things. And it was so great. The only person who was treating this as like DEFCON 1 was CNN's correspondent, who was trying to desperately to present himself as the brave reporter. Like just the citizens just looking at him.
Well, this actually upsets me a little bit more than you realized, because I was born in Lvov. I hadn't been there since I left at 1.5, and this is the 3rd year in a row I've been trying to go back with our good friend Chris Williamson, and it has not been happening. So fact that Don Lemon got there before I did really grinds my gears, sir.
It's another reason to dislike him.
Let me ask you this: you were talking earlier about Ben Shapiro. Is the intellectual dark web still a thing, or was it ever really a thing to begin with?
I don't think it. Well, it was a thing of a kind. I mean, it was Eric Weinstein, obviously, who sort of had an attempt to he wanted to come up with a term to group together a disparate group of people and sort of vaguely. It was an intelligent. It was a characteristically clever thing of Eric's, because this something exists for which a name should exist. Right. Here's a name, But it was never particularly coherent, and most people who were identified as being part of it denied being a part of it, and a lot of people who weren't part of it claimed to be part of it. I think that it summed up something. The reality, I think, is that the amazing factionalization of the last few years, and I mean the fact that, as I've said to others, including our friend Chris, this sort of way in which there's been issue after issue which massively divides people and divides us all in ways that it's almost like watching somebody being sliced up, because nobody follows everything else another person is going to do or say. And now, after the era of COVID and BLM and now Russia, Ukraine, and all this sort of thing, there's a sort of set of completely different stories that have unfortunately successfully, I think, sort of scattered people. And I think I say that the intellectual dark web, I mean, obviously the constituent parts still exist, but I think that its membership has been scattered for sure.
Which do you think has had a bigger impact on breaking people's brains, President Trump or COVID?
Oh, it's hard. In America, it's hard to separate out the two.
Yes.
I mean, I really do. Some people disagree with this, but I really do believe that if Donald Trump had been wildly pro-mask, Democrats would have been tearing masks off in recent years. Oh, of course. They just do whatever he doesn't do, and so it's only really in America that was completely
conflated,
locked together. Everywhere else, they were two different things. I mean, there were countries like France and indeed Britain to some extent, certainly Australia. I mean, wow, where it was a totally different story, And I mean, I think Donald Trump probably was. Donald Trump went on for longer, didn't he? I mean, it was 4 years, not just under 2.
Yeah.
I think in my experience, he got into people's brains more. I think the COVID thing, anyone who didn't only associate it with the Trump thing, I think it was an additional just confusion and confounding thing. I mean, I found it myself very unclear for a long time what on earth was going on, because there had never been a pandemic of that kind in my lifetime. And a lot of people now who have no particular public voice sort of think, that anyone who does have a public voice should speak about everything. Yeah. And I really try not to do that. And I never spent any of my life working on or thinking about pandemics. And when people said, you've got to come out for X, I was like, well, I'm not making a call on this because I don't know. And I held that line until it became clear that, we were basically, the virus wasn't everything we thought it was at the beginning, was less deadly than we thought it was. That the lockdowns were going to, by the time they were talking about second lockdowns, I was very against all that. But I think that has caused a huge amount of division for sure. But Trump got into people's heads as a sort of mind virus in a way more. It was Trump that people would divorce over.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone divorced over COVID. They divorced there were definitely people who divorced because they were locked in their houses with their spouse. But I don't think there are many people who in my observation, who sort of separated because of those things. Whereas things like Trump, like there were, that was a real problem.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Fetisi.
I love hearing people's stories of resilience and grit. This is why I created this podcast.
We are very excited to welcome Jim Gaffigan, Yasmin Mohammed, Glenn Beck, Tim Dillon, Abigail Schreier, Jeff Garland, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Sam Harris, Heather Hying, Jonah Goldberg, Ben Shapiro, Glenn Greenwald, Sarah Shahi, Colin Quinn.
If there's a culture of victimhood, then let's tell stories of grit and survival.
Subscribe and listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's get back to the show. One of the theses that you are best known for, and I want you to state in your own words because I don't want to misquote you, is basically the idea that as societies get confused about gender and sexuality, that tends to correlate with their collapse. What am I? Do you know what I'm referring to? How
Yes.
would you phrase that?
I have said it, but I'm not really the person responsible for that insight.
Okay.
I sort of pushed it out there, but it's actually Camille Paglia who suggested it first.
Oh, I love her. She's my
I know.
idol.
I want to give her credit. I quote her in Madness of Crowds for this observation and carry it a bit further. I do think there's a lot in it. I do think the whole sort of erasure of sexes and the turning of sexes into 100 genders is a form of deliberate mass confusion. I mean, maybe it starts off generically and then becomes pushed by bad faith actors. I think it's the same thing with the sort of phenomena I'm writing about in The War on the West. I mean, what I was describing when I was doing that about sexuality and the madness of crowds was to describe why we were going madder than we needed to go, and that it was because we were being told to believe things which were untrue, such as that the idea that that there's no such thing as sex, it's gender assigned at birth. A rather bigoted delivery room nurse decided that I was a boy, and as a result I can never give birth to a child. That sort of thing. That's deliberately deranging. It's caught on because it's deranging, and the people who push that nonsense. Well, my favorite one was a story the other day in the British press about a woman described who used a wheelie bin as a sex toy and stuck her penis into it repeatedly in public down a back alley somewhere in Sheffield. It wasn't the world's most romantic assignation ever, but the point is that everything about it is like almost deliberately designed in the headline to piss you off. It's designed to say, like, what do you mean, pointing to the fact it's her penis? Same thing with the swimmers stuff. I just think it's that dude who wins all the women's races now in American college sports. Apparently still has his meat and two veg, as we say in the UK, and apparently still dates girls. But you've got to so basically a straight guy in everything apart from when he's swimming. The minute you throw him into a water, he becomes a woman.
It's like Ariel, or they're in reverse, right?
I know. Such a beautiful myth happening right in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with all this stuff of demeaning our history. I think it's deliberately deranging. I think it's a similar thing. You take away all of the things that the society believes they know, and you have a totally demoralized society. Take away the belief that the fundamental thing that children know from the beginning, boy or girl, is actually totally mysterious and impossible to discern, and you really have to do gender studies, and you have to send your children to kindergarten to be taught the gender fluidity or whatever, and that they might be a girl the next day, so one of the first things we know, boy or girl, is taken away, and then every story of your society that holds your society together is also then taken away. I think these things are deliberate. They're deliberate attempts at mass demoralization of the public by incredibly bad faith actors.
Can I ask? I don't know if I'm not disagreeing with you that it's demoralization. I think it's also the kind of concept of taking away your creation myth. You're my enemy, and now you need a creation myth, as any nation or and even family does. And now your only alternative is what I'm presenting to you as a creation myth, which is the 1619 Project.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point about the Marx thing as well. Like, strip away everyone from history except for who do we have left? Karl Marx. say that everything in the history books, every actual historian is misleading, and that the only person is the non-historian, Nicole Hannah-Jones, who doesn't know what the hell she's talking about, who seems to think that, among other things, slavery and the plantations were the natural expression of capitalism, whereas anyone who knows anything knows that it was just feudalism, nothing else. Do that stuff, and so pretend that the non-historians are historians and that the historians don't know what they're talking about. Pretend that all of your heroes are villains and that actual villains from history are heroes. Do all of this sort of thing, and you just got this sort of beleaguered, confounded population staggering around looking for somebody to give them answers, and all of the somebodies are totally reprehensible, mainly left-wing ideologues.
But I want to. What other examples historically do you think exist where there is confusion of gender and sexuality that leads to kind of societal decline?
Well, it happens at the end of the Roman Empire, it happens at the end of the Greek Empire as well. Sort of interested in the statue, and interested in the myths and the statue, the sort of they would have called it, or would refer to it as a sort of hermaphroditism, for instance. And I'm afraid I'm not one of those people who believes that the human race is destined forever to replay the 1930s, as those who only know one bit of history do. But another more obvious and more up-to-date example is Weimar Germany.
Yeah, but there's also, at the same time, you had 1920s, you had the new woman in America. She's cutting her hair. She's drunk on gin. She's smoking cigarettes. She's, Dorothy Parker had that joke. If the entire Yale sorority class was laid end to end, I wouldn't be surprised, or something like that. And then you had in the 60s when guys were growing their hair long. They were turning their backs to the military and becoming doves, which was just the most effeminate thing at the time. Like, you might as well just cut it all off. But those didn't lead to like the collapse of America.
Ooh, don't know about that.
What do you
Too
mean?
early to tell, isn't it?
Well, is it a collapse if it takes a century?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
So this
Took
is like
400 years. Took 400 years for the Roman Empire to collapse.
But at a certain point, is it really a collapse if it takes 400 years as opposed to
Yes.
a sustained decline?
No, it's a collapse. It can just collapses can take an awfully long time. I mean, I tend to think, I don't know, put it another way, I mean, maybe they're more like bankruptcies.
Okay.
The famous, who was it who said about bankruptcies? They happen awfully slow and then awfully fast.
It's Hemingway. How do you go bankrupt? Two ways, gradually and then suddenly.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. It's an amazing observation, that. But yes, I mean, I would say that the stuff I'm describing in the War in the West is stuff that has its genesis in the 1960s and 1970s in America. Absolutely. It's a group of people who are trying to think at that time, and whose thinking is all embedded in a form of existing dislike of their own society, and reliant on lies that they've imbibed from elsewhere. I think all of the sort of the things I'm describing, definitely you can trace back to the 60s and 70s in America. It's why, as I say, America has become a net exporter of bad ideas. They all have their genesis here. All of the anti-Westernism of recent years, there's lots of different anti-Westernisms in the world, but the Western anti-Westernism is most strong from America.
Oh, yeah,
it's been coming since the 1960s. And, it's been speeding up a bit in the last 20 years. I say, even outside of academia, which can be overemphasized. 20 years ago, remember Michael Moore's book, Stupid White Men? With a chapter on stupidity of whitey, as he calls him. Michael Moore says, show me any crime in world history and I can find a white man behind it. It shows there's not very much history that Michael Moore knows. But that sort of talk had become really quite popular by then. And by 2020, in the summer of George Floyd, become a sort of really vicious mainlining of it, mainstreaming of it occurs. And we're in that now. And I think that yes, I mean, whether we get out of it or not is something that absolutely everything now hangs on. But yes, I think it's perfectly possible that a decline or a fall of a country like America or the West, it could be something we're in the midst of. I just don't know where. I just hope we avoid it. I hope I'm proved wrong. And I believe we can only avoid it if people are armed with the actual facts. By the way, I mean, it's one of the things I try to do in my book and in general, is to arm people with facts that they may not know. I mean, I've discovered since this book started to come out, and since the serial came out, nobody knew what I just told you about Karl Marx. And let me throw one other one out there, because I always say, you can't look at American history and other Western history without some damn context. Find me, does 1 in a million Americans currently know the following fact: that maybe 10 to 12 million people were brought across the Atlantic in the slave trade from Africa to Americas. Up to 18 million people in the same period were taken from Africa to the Arab countries, the Eastern slave trade. Does 1 in a million Americans know that there was a much bigger slave trade going on to the Arab countries? No. Does 1 in a million people know why there are no descendants of those slaves in the Arab countries? Because the Arabs cut off the genitals of every male black African in order to make sure there was no next generation. This was an actual genocide. This was going on in the Arab countries, still goes on today, by the way. There are still 40 million slaves in the world today, it's estimated, in Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere. I've met some myself. That's more slaves in the world at the height of the slave trade in the 19th century. Does 1 in a million Americans know any of this? No. Does 1 in a million Brits know any of this? No. We need to know these things. We need to have a proper appreciation of ourselves and of what the rest of the world has been doing and is doing now. Otherwise, we're just this absolute dopes and morons who can be taken advantage of. And, the CCP and others pump out propaganda about our own wickedness, and we'll fall for it again because we've been totally deracinated, totally demoralized, and then get pumped full of whatever shit the Communist Party of China or anyone else wants to give to us.
And also, corporate America is a much more effective vector of CCP propaganda than the CCP.
Absolutely, absolutely. Really I didn't expect, I didn't expect Disney to be forcing non-binary mouse on me, effectively. By the way, I hope they do that the company that made its fortune on Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse decide to go all in and have non-binary mouse and see their share price plummet even further.
Douglas, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
It's been from beginning to end, Michael.
You are welcome.
Stream the biggest movies and TV shows for free on Pluto TV. Watch movies like Titanic and G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, plus TV shows like CSI and Star Trek: The Next Generation. Starting this month, check out the 24/7 Stargate channel exclusively on Pluto TV. Plus hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows absolutely free. Download the free Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start watching today.